The morning Shane Lawson walked into the Harlan County elevator, he had Pepper at his heels and a storage statement folded in the front pocket of his canvas jacket. He was not in a hurry. He had not been in a hurry about grain in 30 years, and he was not about to start. Dale Vickers was behind the counter when Shane came through the door. Dale was always behind the counter. He had a good head of hair for a man his age, kept his collared shirts pressed, and wore the kind of boots that had never seen a muddy field. He had managed the Harlan County elevator for 22 years, and he had strong opinions about when a farmer ought to sell his grain, and those opinions had not changed measurably in all that time. Ray Vogel was there that morning, too, leaning against the far end of the counter with a clipboard and a paper cup of coffee going cold. Ray was the county extension agent and had been watching the way Shane managed his storage program since about 2004. At first out of professional curiosity, and later out of something closer to admiration. He had a habit of writing things down in a narrow green notebook, and he had the notebook with him that morning. Dale set a ledger printout on the counter. It showed Shane's stored grain position across 5 bins, the dates the grain had come in off the combine, the current local cash price, and the basis differential versus the December futures contract. He read the numbers without expression. Then he looked up. "You're sitting on $61,000 worth of corn and soybeans right now," Dale said. "All of it stored since October." He said it the way a man says something he cannot quite account for. Not with admiration exactly, and not yet with embarrassment. With a kind of recalibration, the way a scale adjusts before it settles on a number. Shane looked at the printout. "About right," he said. Ray wrote something in the green notebook. "Let me take you back to 1989, because that number on that counter did not appear out of nowhere. It had a source, and the source had a name, and the name was Harlan Lawson. Harlan Lawson had farmed 480 acres in Harlan County for 38 years before his heart gave out the winter of 1988. He was not a flashy man. He drove a 1974 pickup that had gone past 240,000 miles and showed every one of them. He wore the same canvas jacket his whole adult life, replacing it only when the elbows gave out completely. He kept his grain in 3 steel bins behind the machine shed, and he tracked his storage decisions in a green canvas ledger that went back to 1961. Shane was 31 when Harlan died. He had worked alongside his father since he was old enough to follow a combine, and he understood the farm the way you understand something you have done with your body for 2 decades without quite naming it. The ledger was different. The ledger made it legible. On the inside front cover, Harlan had written a single line in pencil. It said, "The price on the board is not the price you get, and the price you get is not what you'll be offered in March." Shane read that line the night his father's attorney handed him the ledger. He read it again 3 times. Then he sat at the kitchen table under the hanging light for a long time without moving. Marlene brought him coffee and did not say anything. She understood that some things needed sitting with. The ledger documented 38 years of basis tracking. Harlan had recorded the local cash price at harvest against the December futures price, then tracked how that gap, the basis, changed through the winter and into spring. In good years, the basis improved by 30 to 50 cents per bushel between October and April. In tight years, when local supply dried up and the elevators needed grain, the improvement ran wider. Harlan had sold almost nothing at harvest in the last 20 years of his farming life. He had sold into the spring rally almost every time, and the numbers in the ledger showed exactly what that discipline had been worth across 4 decades. It had been worth enough to pay off the mortgage on 480 acres. in 1979. 10 years before his death, Harlan Lawson had owned his land free and clear. Shane inherited the farm, the equipment, and the ledger all at once. He also inherited a small operating debt his father had taken on to replace the combine in 1986, roughly $42,000 at 9.5%, and he paid that off inside 3 years by doing what his father had done, watching the basis, storing the grain, and selling when the market came to him rather than the other way around. The first time Dale Vickers had something to say about this was the summer of 1991. Shane had just finished his second bin expansion. He had put up a 40,000 bushel bin the summer before, and now he was adding another 18,000 bushels of capacity. The concrete was still curing when Dale walked over from the elevator, which sat a quarter-mile down the county road on the south end of town. "You're turning into a bin farmer," Dale said. He was smiling, but the smile did not quite reach the point where it became warmth. "You know the co-op's got a forward contract for next fall's corn at $3.40. That's a real price, Shane. You don't need all this storage if you just lock it in." Shane looked at the new bin for a moment. "Dad never forward contracted," he said. "Your dad," Dale said, still smiling, "left you $42,000 in debt." That was the first time. The word debt in Dale's mouth, delivered with a kind of cheerful authority, as though the $42,000 was evidence of something rather than the temporary result of buying equipment. Shane did not answer. He went back to helping the bin contractor level the ring sections, and Dale drove back down the road. Pepper, who was 3 years old that summer, watched Dale's truck go and then lay down in the shade under the bin. Shane did not take the forward contract. He built the bin, stored his grain, and sold into the spring of 1992 when the basis had improved by 41 cents per bushel over the October price. On 6,700 bushels of corn, that 41 cents meant just under $2,800 he would not have seen if he had sold in October. It was not a life-changing number. Harlan's ledger had warned him it would not be at first. The discipline paid in years, not in single transactions. He built a fourth bin in 1994. By then he had storage capacity for 55,000 bushels, and he had begun to develop a reputation at the Harlan County elevator that was not exactly flattering. The farmers who sold at harvest, which was most of them, tended to regard Shane's bin building the way they regarded any other deviation from common practice, with a mixture of puzzlement and mild suspicion. Dale Vickers gave the sentiment its clearest public expression one Saturday morning in October of 1994. Shane had come in to check the posted basis and pick up a fuel receipt, and there were 4 other farmers at the counter waiting for scale tickets. Dale was in the middle of a story about forward contracts and risk management, the kind of story that was really an advertisement for the elevator's marketing program, and he paused when Shane came through the door. "Here's the man with the most grain storage in the county," Dale said loud enough for the room. "Shane, I keep telling your neighbors here that the smart play is to sell it and forget it. You want to explain to these gentlemen why you'd rather pay for steel than take a guaranteed price." One of the men near the end of the counter, a younger farmer named Pritchard, whose father had sold out in '87, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Shane set his receipt on the counter. "I take the price I decide on," he said, "not the one the calendar decides on." "That's real poetic," Dale said. "Hope the basis cooperates." He said it the way you say something when you're already certain you've won the exchange. Shane went home. He recorded the October cash price and the December futures price in the ledger, and he added a note about the basis, which that fall was running 47 cents under the futures contract, wide by historical standards. He wrote the number down and set the ledger on the shelf above the kitchen table. Now let me tell you about Curtis, because the story of Shane's bins is also the story of his younger brother, and you cannot separate the two. Curtis Lawson had farmed on shares since 1992, renting 320 acres, 8 miles east of Shane's place. Curtis was a capable farmer and a hard worker. He planted on time, kept his equipment clean, and scouted his fields the way Harlan had taught both of them. The one thing Curtis did differently from Shane was sell his grain at harvest every year, without exception. He had his reasons. He was renting, not owning, which meant he did not have bins of his own and could not afford to build them. He had a bank note on his tractor and planter. He had 2 kids in school and a heating system in the house that was 10 years past its expected life. Selling at harvest meant the check arrived when the bills did, and that reliability was worth something real to Curtis. Shane never told Curtis he was wrong. What the ledger showed, year by year, was the gap accumulating quietly. Through the 1990s, it was measured in single-field increments, a few $1,000s here on corn, $1,800 there on soybeans. Shane rolled the extra margin back into bin payments and then into his operating account. There was an evening in March of 2001 that Shane remembered as the night he stopped doubting whether the method was working at the scale he needed it to. He had come in from the bins at 6:30 after pulling a sample from bin 2 and running it through the moisture meter on the kitchen counter. The same Dickie John meter Harlan had bought used in 1986 and that Shane had sent in for calibration once every 3 years since. The corn read 13.7. The basis on the morning posting at the elevator had improved 53 cents over October. He sat down at the kitchen table and opened the ledger to the running column for the 2000 crop. Marlene was at the stove with a pot of beans. She did not look up. "What did it come in at?" she said. 53 cents, Shane said. "Higher than last year." 3 cents higher? She wrote it on a magnetized notepad on the side of the refrigerator, the way she wrote most things, in pencil, in her quick small hand. He totaled the column. The 2000 crop had been 17,400 bushels of corn between bins 1 and 2. At 53 cents per bushel of basis improvement against the October cash, the column showed a difference of $9,222 over what an October sale would have produced. He wrote the number at the bottom of the page. He looked at it for a moment. He turned back to the page for the 1999 crop. That column showed $5,800 at 38 cents on a smaller crop. He turned back to 1998, which had been a flat year on the basis, and the column showed $980 on a small soybean rally, and a corn move that was not worth the storage time. 3 years stacked up. $16,002 of basis income that the patience column had produced over and above what selling at harvest would have produced. Marlene came over to the table. She put a plate down in front of him. She read the bottom number on the page and the columns that fed it. "That paid for the new air system in bin 3, she said. "That and the calibration on the meter." "Is that the new air system in bin 3 plus another year on the bin note?" "Both," Shane said. She sat down across from him. She did not say anything for a while. She ate a few bites of beans. Then she said, "Curtis came by yesterday. He said you've gotten quieter the last 2 years." Shane thought about that. He cut a piece of bread. "I have," he said. "Why?" she said. "Because the column is doing the talking now," he said. "I don't have to." She nodded at that. She had known him long enough that the answer was not a surprise. She finished her dinner and got up and put the dishes in the sink and came back and stood at his shoulder for a minute, looking at the ledger. She tapped the 2000 column. "Pay the bin note off this fall," she said. "Will do," he said. By 2001, he had the last of his bin debt retired, and his storage capacity stood at 55,000 bushels, unencumbered. Curtis, in those same years, had paid for a new planter in 1998 and a used tractor in 2003, and kept a note at the bank that hovered between $30,000 and $60,000 depending on input costs and what corn did in the fall. If you sat both men down in 2005 and looked at them without knowing the numbers, you would not have picked Shane as the one pulling ahead. He drove a 2001 pickup with a cracked windshield. He had not updated the kitchen since Marlene's mother gave them a new refrigerator in 1997. His tractor was a 1991 model. He maintained himself in a machine shed that smelled of gear oil and old hay. Curtis had a newer truck, a cleaner shop, and a propane bill he could actually afford that winter. The grain, though, was already talking. Then came 2008, and grain started talking loudly. The summer of 2008 was a commodity price run that nobody in the Corn Belt had seen in their working lives. Corn went past $5, then past $6. Shane had been tracking the Chicago Board of Trade basis chart for 3 months by the time corn touched $6.20 per bushel in June, and he had $61,000 in corn that had come off his combine the previous October at $3.10. He'd been holding it in 3 of his 5 bins, monitoring moisture weekly, waiting. He sold in June at $6.14 after basis on 38,000 bushels of corn and 2,200 bushels of soybeans. The arithmetic on the corn alone, measured against the October price he would have taken if he had sold at harvest, was a difference of just over $119,000. Curtis had sold his corn in October at $3.12. He had needed the check. Shane did not call Curtis to discuss it. He recorded the sale in the ledger, wrote the deposit slip, and drove to town to put the check in the bank. On the way home, he stopped at the elevator to pick up a parts receipt, and Dale was behind the counter. Dale had heard about the sale, the way people hear about things in a county this size. "Lucky year for the holders," Dale said. His voice was still carrying the same tone as always, the one that made it sound like whatever you had done was mostly an accident. "Wasn't luck," Shane said. He said it without heat, the way you state a fact that does not require defense. "Basis could have gone the other way," Dale said. "Could have," Shane said. He picked up his receipt and went out to his truck. Pepper was waiting under the bumper. She was 20 now, and the way dogs are 20, slower, grayer at the muzzle, but she made the trip to town without complaint. Shane led her into the cab and drove home on the county road with the windows down. 4 years after 2008 came the year that settled the question for good. The drought of 2012 arrived in pieces, the way the worst droughts do. February was dry. April was dry. By July, the corn was tasseling early on stressed stalks, and by August, the elevators across the county were already discounting for low test weight and high moisture content. The local basis went wide in a way Shane had only seen once before, back in 1988, when he was still learning the farm under Harlan's eye. Harvest came in September with corn at national prices that looked reasonable on paper, around $7.80 on the board, but the local basis had collapsed to minus 80 cents and worse in some counties, meaning the actual check a farmer received at the elevator was $7 or less per bushel, and in some cases considerably less once drying and shrink charges hit the ticket. Curtis had 320 acres of thin corn that fall. He had no bins. He had a bank note due in November. He sold everything at harvest, all of it, at a net cash price of $6.92 per bushel after basis, drying, and shrink. His corn averaged 81 bushels per acre on the drought year, down from a normal 160. He delivered roughly 25,000 bushels. He took what the market gave him. Shane had 38,000 bushels in his bins when October arrived. His corn was dry. His storage was clean. He had no operating note due until spring because he had paid the last of his input costs out of a money market account he had been feeding since 2009. He watched the basis charts through October, through November, through December. In February of 2013, he sold. The basis had recovered by 87 cents per bushel over the harvest price. On 38,000 bushels, that was $33,000 he collected that winter that Curtis had not collected in the fall. The same county, the same drought. Two completely different outcomes. Marlene stood at the sink that evening looking out at the bins, and she said something she had not said before. "Shane," she said. "Curtis's note came due, and he's short. I heard from his wife today." Shane was quiet for a moment. "How short?" he said. Marlene turned from the window. "Enough that it matters. Something about the drying bill running over." Shane went to the bank the next morning and drew a check for $11,000 and drove to Curtis's place without calling ahead. Curtis came out of the machine shed when he heard the truck. He was still in work clothes mid-morning, and he had grease on his hands from something he'd been taking apart. Shane held out the check. "For the note," he said. Curtis looked at it. He started to say something and stopped. "Shane, I can't." "You're not borrowing it," Shane said. "It's the difference between what you got for your corn and what the basis would have given you in February if you'd had a place to put it. Call it what it is." Curtis took the check. He did not say thank you, because the kind of gratitude that is too large to speak does not come out as the word thank you. He looked at it for a long moment with his hands still greasy from the shop work. He was 47 that winter. He had farmed his rented ground for 21 years. He had 2 kids in school and a heating bill he had paid that morning by drawing against an emergency margin he kept thin on purpose, because his cash flow ran on harvest checks, and harvest checks alone. He folded the check in half and put it in the chest pocket of his coveralls without saying anything about it. He looked up at his older brother. "How long have you been keeping track of what the basis would have been for me?" Curtis asked. Shane thought about that. "Since around 98, he said. "I never asked you to do that," Curtis said. "I know," Shane said. "Wasn't for you to ask." Curtis nodded. He looked at the shop and at the old planter behind him, and at the snow that was starting to fall in the yard. "Pop kept your ledger going," Curtis said. "Pop wrote in the front of it, 'The price on the board is not the price you get, and the price you get is not what you'll be offered in March.'" "I know that line," Curtis said. "I've heard it." "He said it to both of us," Shane said. "I just listened to it longer." Curtis half laughed, the kind of laugh that was not a laugh, but the closest his face was going to get to one that morning. He shook Shane's hand. They stood for a minute in the cold without talking. Then Shane went back to his truck, and Curtis went back into the shop, and that was the end of the conversation that neither of them needed to have a second time. Let me tell you what was happening at the elevator during those same years, because Dale's story runs alongside Shane's the whole way, and you cannot understand the recognition scene without knowing where Dale was standing when it happened. The Harlan County Elevator had posted solid throughput numbers through the 2000s on the strength of a region that was still mostly harvest sell, mostly co-op marketing, and mostly trusting the advisory sheet that came with the monthly statement. Dale had built that model carefully. He knew the farmers, knew their cash flow patterns, knew that a man with a banknote due in November was going to sell his corn in October, regardless of what the basis was doing. What Dale had not accounted for was the slow spread of private on-farm storage. It was not just Shane. Through the early 2000s, as equipment and steel bin prices came down relative to grain prices, more farmers in the county had started building their own storage. Not many, and not fast. But by 2010, the elevator's autumn throughput was running about 12% below its 2003 peak, and by 2014, it was down 18%. The farmers who stored at home were selling into the spring market and showing up at the elevator in February and March rather than October, which disrupted the elevator's cash flow model, as well as its throughput guarantees. In 2015, Dale's elevator posted its first operating loss in 23 years. It was a small loss, $47,000, against revenues of just over $2 million, and it was covered by reserves. But the pattern was plain. The elevator had been built on the premise that farmers would deliver grain in the fall, pay storage fees, and take the cash price. When enough farmers stored at home and took the basis improvement themselves, the math changed. Shane's storage income, by 2015, exceeded his total annual input costs for seed, fertilizer, and chemicals. He was, in a sense, running his field operation on money. The market paid him for patience. He did not tell anyone this. He was still driving the 2001 pickup. He had replaced the windshield in 2007 and put a new transmission in it in 2011. The tractor in the machine shed was a 1991 model with a rebuilt injection pump and a hydraulic hose he checked every morning. Marlene's kitchen had not changed. The refrigerator her mother gave them in 1997 was still running. The land, though, was not standing still. Northern Plains farmland prices had been climbing since the early 2000s in a way that the county's older farmers had never seen in their working lives. In 1989, Shane had inherited 480 acres that were worth roughly $560 per acre by the county assessor's valuation. That number had moved slowly through the 1990s, picking up speed after 2005, and by 2019, the same 480 acres were carrying a market value of approximately $4,800 per acre. 480 acres at $4,800 per acre is $2,304,000. Shane had paid off the last of his father's equipment note in 1992. He had not borrowed against the land. He had not refinanced to buy equipment. He had not taken a line of credit during the years when lenders were offering them to grain farmers on favorable terms because land values were rising and cash rents were at their peak. He owned 480 acres in Harlan County without a mortgage or a lien of any kind, had owned them that way since his father's note was cleared, and the land was now worth, on the open market, $2,304,000. He still did not think of it in those terms. He thought of it in terms of what it would produce and what the basis would do in the spring, and whether the moisture in Bin 4 was holding below 14%. It was February of 2019 when the recognition scene happened, and it did not happen the way recognition scenes happen in stories where someone plans them. Shane had gone to the elevator to pick up a settlement check for a January soybean sale. Ray Vogel happened to be there for a county grain quality survey he was completing for the state extension office, and Dale was behind the counter, and the Saturday morning crowd was there again, 3 other farmers on the same side of the counter, and a young woman from the bank who had driven out to discuss the elevator's operating account. Pepper was 9 years old. She had slowed considerably. She waited just inside the door on the rubber mat and lay down there with her chin on her paws. Dale handed Shane the settlement sheet and the check. He looked at the settlement sheet for a moment before he let it go. Because the January soybean basis had been running unusually strong, and the price on Shane's settlement was 31 cents per bushel over the October harvest price on 11,000 bushels of beans. "You captured the whole move," Dale said. He was not performing this time. His voice had a different quality to it, quieter. The way a man speaks when he is actually doing arithmetic rather than maintaining position. "What did you end up netting on those November beans you held?" Shane folded the check and put it in his shirt pocket. 741.5 after basis, he said. Dale looked at the board. October cash price had been 710. He worked it without a calculator, then looked back at Shane. "That's what, $3,400 you left on the table if you'd sold them in October," Dale said. "Other way around," Shane said. Ray wrote in the green notebook. One of the other farmers at the counter, a younger man named Thelen, who had started renting ground 4 years earlier, asked what he meant. $3,400 I collected in January that I would not have collected in October," Shane said. "Not money I left on the table. Money I picked up by waiting." Dale set the settlement sheet down on the counter. He straightened it once, unnecessarily. "How many years you been doing this?" he asked. "Since 1989, Shane said. "Dad did it for 28 years before that." The woman from the bank was looking at something on her phone, and then she was not. She looked at Shane. Dale took a breath. It was a long breath, the kind that carries something in it, some adjustment of the internal ledger. He was 63 years old and had been advising farmers to sell at harvest and trust the co-op marketing program for his entire professional life. He had called Shane a bin farmer in 1991. He had called it poetry at the counter in 1994. He had said lucky in 2008. "I owe you a different conversation than the ones I've been having," Dale said. He was looking at the counter rather than at Shane when he said it. Shane did not argue with that. "Your dad's ledger. Is that what you're working from?" Dale said. "Started there," Shane said. "Kept building it." Ray closed the green notebook and put it in his coat pocket. He had, over the preceding 15 years, written approximately 14 pages of informal documentation on Shane's storage and basis strategy, its year-by-year arithmetic, and the way it diverged from standard co-op marketing recommendations. He was planning to use that documentation in a county extension presentation the following spring, illustrating the long-term value of basis tracking for producers with on-farm storage, and he had already asked Shane if it would be all right to include his figures without naming him. Shane had said that was fine. Thelen, the younger farmer, asked Shane if he ever missed on the basis call. "About once every 4 years, Shane said. "When I miss, I take the same price as everybody else. When I don't, I take a better one." That was the longest answer anyone had heard Shane give at the elevator counter in his adult life. He whistled for Pepper on the way out, and she got up slowly from the rubber mat and followed him through the glass door into the cold. Marlene was in the truck. She had driven to town with him that morning for her own errands and was waiting in the cab with the heater running. When he got in, she looked at the check in his shirt pocket. "Good settlement?" she said. "Fair," he said. She smiled at that. In 30 years of marriage, she had learned the difference between the way Shane said fair, when something was barely adequate, and the way he said it when something was about right. He pulled out of the elevator lot, and drove home on the county road. And Pepper lay on the back seat, with her head resting on her paws, and the gray winter fields going by outside. The generosity beat when it came, was quiet. The way most of what Shane did was quiet. It was the spring of 2022 when Shane sat down with Marcus, Curtis's son. Marcus was 26, had been working for Curtis since he finished his associate's degree in agriculture, and had been looking at rented ground in the county for 2 years without being able to put together the cash flow to make the numbers work. Land rents had run up sharply in the preceding 4 years. The county average for row crop ground was sitting at $210 per acre, which was not impossible, but was very tight at current corn prices for a young operator with a new equipment note and no bin capacity. Shane had 160 acres on the south end of his place that he was farming himself, but did not need to farm himself. It was the field his father had bought in 1972, the one with the tile drainage that put it ahead of every other field in that part of the county in a wet spring. Shane had been watching Marcus for 2 years. He had watched him work Curtis's fields, had watched how he scouted, how he calibrated the planter, how he kept his equipment. He had watched specifically how Marcus handled a wet April, which was when you learned whether a young farmer was patient or just lucky. Marcus was patient. "I'll lease you the 160, Shane said. 140 an acre. Marcus looked up. "That's county average is 210, he said. "I know what it is," Shane said. "Why would you do that?" Marcus asked. Shane turned the ledger so Marcus could see the columns, not the recent pages, but the early ones, the 1990s, when the basis gains were small and the years were long and the discipline was not yet proving itself in any dramatic way. "Because somebody needs to give you room to build storage," Shane said. "You can't watch the basis if you sell everything at harvest to pay the rent." He tapped the column that showed the 1992 spring sale, the 41-cent improvement on 6,700 bushels, the modest number that had been the first proof the method worked. "That's where it starts," Shane said. "Small. You track it." Marcus took the lease. First option to buy the 160 acres at $3,900 per acre, locked for 5 years. The county average for comparable ground was running between $4,500 and $5,000 per acre. Shane locked Marcus's option at $3,900. It was not a complicated calculation on Shane's part. It was what the land was worth to someone who was going to farm it right, at the price that would leave Marcus enough margin to build his first bin. Curtis heard about the arrangement that same evening when Marcus called him. He was quiet on the phone for a long moment before he said anything. "Your uncle," Curtis finally said. Then he stopped. "I know," Marcus said. By the fall of 2023, Marcus had broken ground on his first bin. It was a 20,000-bushel hopper bottom on a concrete pad at the north end of the leased field, and he had bought it with the margin he had saved over 18 months of farming at below-market rent. He had also started a basis log in a green composition notebook, not canvas like Harlan's, but in the same columns, the same format, the same discipline. Shane had shown him the columns. He had not told him what to put in them. That part, Marcus would have to learn from the market itself, the same way Harlan had learned it, the same way Shane had. Late in October of 2023, on a Thursday evening before rain was forecast, Shane walked his bins in the last of the light. There were 5 of them now, the original 3 Harlan had built and the 2 Shane had added in 1990 and 1994, and they were full. 55,000 bushels of corn and soybeans he had harvested the previous week and would sell into the spring rally the way his father had done, And his father's father before that, in whatever informal version the practice took, before the futures markets gave it a name. The corn had gone in clean, 14.1% moisture at the scale. No need to run the dryer. The soybeans had gone in at 12.8. He had checked the aeration fans that morning, and they were running correctly. The bins would hold through winter without trouble. He stood at the northeast corner of the last bin for a moment, looking east, where Marcus's new bin was visible at the horizon, a small silver cylinder catching the last of the day's light. He had his hands in his jacket pockets, and his boots were muddy from the afternoon, and he was not thinking about $2,300,000 or 33 years of basis gains or the ledger on the shelf above the kitchen table. He was thinking about 14.1% moisture, and whether the forecast was calling for more than an inch. Pepper came around the end of the bin and sat down beside his left boot without being called. She was 15 now, which is old for a working dog, and she moved carefully on the cold evenings. But she still made the walk out to the bins when Shane did. She settled her chin on his boot and closed her eyes. The rain came in around midnight as forecast. 1.1 inches by morning. Shane slept through it, the way a man sleeps when his bins are full and his ground is paid for, and the only debt he carries is the kind that does not charge interest.